Hello, friends. I'm Kush Khandelwal, and this is Ageless Athlete. A few years ago, I started asking questions that would not leave me alone. Why do some people keep pushing mentally, physically, spiritually long after others burn out or break down? What does it really mean to age well when you still crave movement, meaning, and mastery? This show is my search for answers. Each week, I talk to elite athletes, everyday adventurers, and pioneering researchers who are stretching the limits of what's possible across age, injury, illness, and self doubt. You will hear hard won lessons, untold stories, and science backed strategies for building a body and mindset that lasts. For those of us joining for the first time, welcome to the show. For the rest, thank you for joining us again. Time is our most valuable asset, and I deeply appreciate you giving me your time today. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Ageless Athlete. This is our episode number 32nd. It's end of June when I release this, and wow, it's amazing that I've been doing this for 6 months now. Thanks for those of us who have been with me for all the journey or most of the journey. Thank you for staying with the show. And those of us who are just joining, I appreciate you discovering Ageless Athlete. And I am so stoked to bring you stories and secrets of age-defying outdoor athletes who are inspiring us and who are changing the way we approach the limits of aging. Today, we are joined by a personal hero. I started reading Eric Hörst's climbing books when I started getting into the sport 20 years ago, back in West Virginia, in the Southeast. And his books were a huge influence to me and my group of friends. I credit Eric's books, How to Climb 512 and also Training for Climbing, as helping me climb my first 512. Crazy, that was almost 2 decades ago. Eric is not just a world-renowned climber, author, and coach. He is a pioneer who revolutionized climbing training. He's been a guiding light, inspiring generations of climbers like myself to reach new heights. We will journey back to the 80s, a time when climbing was a niche sport with limited resources. He was experimenting with techniques and philosophies that transformed the way we train. He shared his insights through these books that I mentioned and also articles helping climbers everywhere push their limits. But Eric's influence extends beyond the climbing world. He's a devoted father who raised a family of passionate climbers. This episode is a treasure trove of wisdom. We will uncover the secrets to Eric's own approach to aging and staying in the game. His insights on balancing a demanding life with his passion for climbing, and then how to make the most of training for longevity and for well-being. We'll explore crucial topics like raising a climbing family. Like I just mentioned, his wife climbs, Eric's two sons are total crushers. Yeah, in this episode, Eric shares his own journey as a parent and provides valuable advice for nurturing young climbers. Selecting a climbing coach, Eric breaks down the key factors to consider when choosing a climbing coach, whether you are a beginner or a seasoned climber. The power of saunas and cold baths. We discuss cryotherapy. Eric discusses the benefits of both saunas and cold baths for recovery and injury prevention. Intermittent fasting for athletes. Eric shares his personal experience with intermittent fasting, and he doesn't recommend this diet to climbers. Eric further emphasizes that a whole food diet is the foundation of any good nutrition plan. And then finally, Eric shares his perspective on climbing goals and how they evolve with age. He believes that focusing on the experience and joy of climbing rather than solely on achieving specific grades really is crucial for long-term happiness and fulfillment. Join us today. I'm so stoked to bring you this conversation with Eric Hörst. Let's roll.
Well, thanks for having me, Kush. I'm delighted to be on the Ageless Athlete podcast. I am a aging athlete, so I guess I'm the right guy for this podcast. And I'm in Pennsylvania, where it's raining. It's early April, so it rains here a lot, unfortunately. A week or two ago, I was out in the desert Southwest enjoying some drier, warmer weather for climbing. Though I got rained on a Joshua tree, so I guess it follows me around. And in terms of breakfast, well, the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is have a couple cups of coffee, a big glass of whey protein to get 30 grams of protein. That's like the first caloric hit of the day. And then I do a mid-morning workout, and then I actually have really my first bona fide meal around midday.
Sounds like a great nutritious way to start your morning. Eric, I am one of the many thousands of climbers who have benefited from your climbing training and education wisdom over the decades.
Thank you.
I actually met you about 2 decades ago at
Wow.
the New River Rendezvous.
Ah,
I learned how to climb at the new, and this is me as an excited greenhorn. And I remember hearing you speak and absorbing every word. And then I went back and bought some of your early books. I have this book here that I credit to helping me climb my first 512.
oh, great.
I am holding this book up for those of us who are not on video. So, yeah, you have provided so much information, wisdom, and motivation to many of us around the world to achieve some of our climbing goals. I am wondering if you have any fun client testimonials to share, any that come to mind, maybe where your education has been transformative in their climbing journey.
Well, it's hard to pick out one. I've worked with thousands of climbers in person. I've had an influencer coached remotely thousands of other climbers through the internet. In the old days, back in the 80s, through the mail, snail mail, I would write training programs, and of course my books. I've written several books. They have circulated around the world to more than 50 countries, and there's 7 or 8 translations of the Training for Climbing book. And so I am humbled, and it's really gratifying to hear from people around the world. I can be at a crag in Germany and somebody recognizes me and comes up and thanks me, kind of like you just did, saying they read a book and it was, changed the trajectory of their climbing or the nature of their training for the better. And yeah, so that's huge for me because I got into the sport almost 50 years ago as a 13-year-old here in Pennsylvania. There was no kid climbers back then. I was just a kid with a few older guys, and climbing was a small kind of sport filled with eccentrics and physicists, and there were no climbing gyms, and there was no climbing in the Olympics, and it was a very different sport. And I fell in love with it, like you did, and many other people do. And the journey I went down on, training for climbing, and being a researcher, and being a coach, and now being a business owner in the climbing industry. Uh, it None of it was planned out. It was just kind of this journey that I set out on at age 13, and I think back on it. It's kind of amazing because I could have not predicted any of it, other than in the start, I just wanted to climb a lot and climb hard and travel. And I did those things and a lot of other things that I could have never imagined along the way. So, but just running into people at the crags, total strangers, shaking their hand, answering training questions, and hearing how my works have influenced them is very, very gratifying. Because, you don't get rich writing climbing books. It's not like I'm writing Tom Clancy novels or anything like that. It's a very modest income, and I, for most of my adult life, worked a full-time job at a university because that's what it took to pay the bills and to raise my kids and send them to college. And So the climbing stuff for most of my career was kind of a secondary job on the side that was just more a labor of love that spun off a little bit of income. Now, in recent years with my business, it's the focus of my work life is PhysiVantage Nutrition, and we'll talk more about that later on.
I've been thinking a lot about energy, not just in training, but in recovery, in focus, in how we age. So when I came across NutriSense, it hit home. It's a program that pairs a 24 by 7 glucose biosensor with a dedicated dietitian to help you understand how your body responds to food, stress, sleep, and movement, and then act on the data. I chose it because I wanted something real, not another hack or one size fits all plan, just honest insight into what's actually going on inside me and how to build habits that last. NutriSense has helped over 150,000 people take that step. And if you want to try it, you can get 33% off your first month with code ageless15 at nutrisense.io. Again, that's nutrisense.io, code ageless15. You can also find this information on the show notes for this episode.
Eric, you were innovating at a time when there wasn't so much literature or published science in this little sport of ours. There were no YouTube videos, and there were no, social media where people were sharing information. Where were you learning? How were you amassing this body of knowledge? Were you your own guinea pig, or were you out climbing with some of your cohort back then and you were trying these things out on each other? Take us back to those early days of developing
Yeah.
your climbing science.
Yeah, you bet. Well, during the 1980s, definitely that was an intense period during my college days and soon thereafter, where I was very much a guinea pig, just trying different things and trying to identify what published science, what proven techniques in other sports. There was no published research in climbing back then, so you had to look at what other sports employed in terms of protocols for developing generalized endurance or strength and power, and then figure out how can we apply this to climbing. And there were a few other climbers around the world doing the exact same thing. In Germany, Wolfgang Gulick engaged a university professor in exercise physiology, and together they basically invented campus training, which was a plyometric training applied to climbing. Plyometric training existed for leg training for jumpers and sprinters and power lifters, but they took the proven protocols for that plyometric training, and then how do we apply this to fingers and arms? And they invented the campus board in Nuremberg, Germany. The training facility where they put the first, built the first board was called the Campus Training Center. That's how the board got named the campus board, because it was in this training center called Campus at the University of Nuremberg. And so that's a neat little piece of history there. And so that was the mode that all of us climbers, which was a very small number of kind of top climbers who are training. Lynn Hill and John Long were kind of developing their training. John Long was a weightlifter and incorporated that a bit into his training. John Gill, the legendary boulderer, who was a generation older than me, but he was climbing and training very hard in the 1960s already. He used gymnastics exercises to mimic certain climbing positions and movements. And so there was, maybe around the world, I don't know, a dozen or so of us that were experimenting and creating and synthesizing from other sports and just our own minds, trying to come up with ideas. John Backer, legendary California climber, developed his own training rigs. He had something called the Death Board, which was a overhanging board with little crimp holds and pockets on it, which was kind of the precursor to an indoor climbing wall or a home woody. He was doing that in the late 70s and into the mid 80s. And so that was something I mimicked and copied after what he was doing. And so there was kind of this interplay, but you're right. There was no literature that existed at the time on training for climbing, no books. And I approached Rock and Ice and Climbing magazine, I believe in 1986, and said, "Hey, I'd like to write a few training articles for you." And they both basically responded, "Eric, nobody trains for climbing. They just go out and climb." And that was kind of true for the masses, but the people that I was hanging out with and idolizing, the people like John Gill, let's say, or Wolfgang Gulick, who I met in the late 80s and talked training with, those people, of course, were training very hard. And they were also pushing the boundaries of climbing. And so I knew that climbers, training could be valuable if done right. But the magazines were like, well, our readers I don't think they want to know about that. And so, you fast forward now 30, 40 years later, and training stuff is everywhere. It's on every website and YouTube video. And so I like to think I was ahead of my time by 30 or 40 years. I just stayed in it long enough until it became in vogue. And, when my first book came out in 1994, I think, and Wolfgang Gulick had a book that came out in the early 90s, and then Dale Goddard and Udo Neumann had a book that came out in the early 90s. So kind of as the 90s evolved, the training started to ramp up.
Sorry, were you collaborating with some of these early pioneers? I did read Performance Rock Climbing way back in the day, and I think it had some influence in my climbing. But these early innovators, was there like a band of brothers where you were sharing notes about what's
Well,
working, what's not working?
I wasn't. I mean, in Europe there was because Wolfgang Gulick and Ben Moon and Jerry Moffat, the three of them would climb together occasionally and train together occasionally in Nuremberg, and and here in the States less so. I think that was the case. I mean, there was a few people around Boulder, Colorado, and a few folks in Yosemite. Backer built his little Yosemite training center, which was just some boards and rings in a tree at the camp there. I, being an East Coast climber, was more isolated. There were a few strong climbers in the East, but it wasn't quite the same as being in Boulder, Colorado, or being in the Frankenjura in Germany, or being in Yosemite. But again, during my travels, I would run into these people. I would run into Backer or Wolfgang Gulick or Todd Skinner, and we would have these lively conversations and kind of trade ideas, and they. In my books, I credit all of them for being an influence on me. And kind of to some degrees, people like John Gill, I kind of view myself standing on his shoulders, carrying on what he started. He was probably the first climber to really train specifically for climbing back in the 60s. So I think of him as some people call me the father of training for climbing. And I'm like, well, John Gill is the grandfather of training for climbing. And now, all these years later, there are top coaches around the country and throughout the world, for sure. So there's now a lot more information available. Although, I hear from a lot of newbie climbers or intermediate climbers that there's so much information out there now that they kind of are overwhelmed and not sure. There's some contradictory or conflicting guidance and information, and so it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's nice to have all this information at your fingertips, but for the end consumer, there's also a lot of overwhelm and confusion, I think, because of that. And so there's still, climbers still have to kind of seek out and suss out what are the more reliable, trustworthy sources, and what fits for them. If you're a 5'10" climber, you shouldn't be trying to mimic or emulate what a 5'14" climber is doing. It's just not appropriate. There's a need for nuance, and that's a word in my Training for Climbing podcast that comes up numerous times each month, is whether you're talking nutrition or training or recovery or biohacking, the nuance is quite critical to get it right for what are the specific needs of a rock climber, because we are quite different from athletes in most other sports in terms of what we ask our bodies to do.
Friends, it means a lot that you're here. I pour a ton of heart into the show. The research, the interviews, the editing, it's all me, trying to share stories that matter. If Ageless Athlete has ever made you feel seen, inspired you, or just kept you company on a long drive, or better, over a run or a bike ride, I would be so grateful if you considered supporting it. Even a small amount helps keep it going, helps keep bringing the show to you for free. You can chip in at buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. Again, buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. You can find the link on the show notes as well. Thank you for listening and for being part of this.
So cool to hear of that trip down memory lane, Eric. Those of us who obsess over climbing history can only imagine, you and the early fathers and uncles of climbing training getting together and exchanging notes at crags and distilling it down for us to learn from. Uh, f- on a fun side note, Eric, congrats on raising a brilliant climbing family. Besides your own climbing accomplishments, your wife climbs, she's an athlete, and then your sons are these young rock stars. A couple
Yeah.
of small questions there, because many people are interested in how to raise the perfect climbing family, and I don't think there's anything such as that. But curious, did your sons naturally gravitate to climbing? Did you coach them yourself, given that you are a coach as well? And then maybe one or two do's and don'ts when it comes to raising a climbing
Mhm.
family?
You bet, Kush. Yeah, and this is a really rich topic, that I could do a whole podcast on, obviously. And I get asked so often. I have parents, sometimes they've just had their first or second child. They're not even out of their diapers yet, and the parents are already thinking these questions. And then other times I hear from the parents when the kids are 13 or 14, and maybe debating whether they want to go into competition climbing or whatnot. And so people do look at me as, and also someone like Robin Erbsfeld in Colorado, who has have two amazing kids, two of the top climbers in the world. One of them an Olympian, Brooke Rabatu, and ask for clues. And there is no perfect answer, because if you looked at the Rabatus, what they did was quite different from what I did. The Rabatu family was pretty much, both of the parents were world champion climbers, World Cup climbers. They owned a small climbing gym in Boulder that grew into a really nationally recognized youth training center of sorts, ABC Climbing. And they were pretty much 100% all in on climbing. For me, the way I evolved as a climber, and the reason I think I'm still climbing all these years later, is that I always had balance in my life. And so, I mentioned earlier that I had a university job for over 30 years that kind of balanced out my climbing travels and my climbing training and book writing. And, my wife was not a climber before I met her. She's actually an LPGA golfer. She's a golf pro, a very talented athlete. And so I taught her to climb kind of as a second sport or as a getaway from her golf world, a very, very different kind of sport, obviously. And I found that there was a beauty and power and ultimately longevity in having this more balanced approach to life. And again, I'm not saying what's right for any individual or wrong. You have to find out what the formula is. But in my case, when we had kids, my wife and I made a conscious decision that yes, we have a big climbing gym in our house, and we have a tread wall and all this training equipment, and climbing posters all over the house. But yet we weren't going to steer our kids only into being climbers, because what if their talent or innate genius was in some other field or sport? So it was kind of our duty to expose them, especially between ages 5 and 10, to as many sports as possible. And part of that is, the neurodevelopment that occurs from age 5 to 10. Your brain should be exposed to ideally as wide a range of things as possible, in terms of, not just moving in a vertical plane climbing, but jumping and sprinting and, your spatial understanding, like flipping and spinning and dancing and swinging bats and clubs and skiing and playing musical instruments. Again, the distinct part of the brain that is being affected by learning to play an instrument. And so between ages 5 and 10, we exposed our kids to, basketball, baseball, skiing, golf, rock climbing, a variety of things, just to sample it, not intense, but to sample it. And while they enjoyed them all, the two that they really fell in love with, the two activities, were rock climbing and football, American football. And so my sons played midget football starting at age 8, I think is when it starts here in Pennsylvania, all the way through high school, age 18. So 10 years where they played tackle football and played at a very high level in high school. They played on a state level team here in Pennsylvania where football is very, very competitive. And they both probably could have played like Division II football if they wanted to, but they had this nice ending to their football career in high school, were ready to climb full time, let's say, because prior to that, they had a climbing season, which was mainly spring and summer. And then they had their football season, which was August through November, let's say. And then they would train a little bit during the winter and climb again the next spring and summer. And so that was the mode they were in for 10 years. And just by climbing part time like that, they both did their first 514s at age, Cameron did his first at age 11 and Jonathan at age 10. So, they weren't really held back too much. The one thing they didn't do is competition climbing, which would have required more of a year-round focus. But we, as a family, were more about the outdoor adventures and experience. And so the competitions weren't something that we gravitated towards. And that was kind of a trade-off, not doing the competition climbing and instead having a season and a half to dedicate to another sport, which ultimately for them was football, that they really went heavily in. And then when they graduated from high school, they've both gone on to college, but they've been 100% focused on climbing as their sport. And they're both doing quite well. Cameron, who's 23 now, has done a couple of routes that are around on the cusp of 515A. And Jonathan's done multiple 514Cs, and I believe this season we'll do a 14D. But the grades aren't that important. They're benchmarks for advancement, but the fact that they kind of went through youth into their young adult life and just still love climbing, that makes it that's the ultimate for me. Grades aside, is that they because a lot of kids get exposed to sports or get exposed to climbing, and then they kind of it plays out and they burn out by age 18 or 20, and then they're out of the sport. And to me, that's sad, because climbing is such a great life sport that even us older guys can do and enjoy and still perform at a pretty high level. And so for my kids to still be involved and super passionate more than ever about climbing heading into their adult life, I consider that a big win. And yeah, they're still, they're finish up college and, develop careers that may or may not relate to climbing. But thank goodness they love climbing. So I think that's kind of the bottom line on the whole thing. So I guess my message to parents is find your kids' natural talent, expose them to a variety of sports when they're young. Don't force them into climbing year round too early, and just kind of figure it out intuitively year over year. It'll all work out for the better.
That's a powerful message. What you're saying makes so much sense because when I speak to other parents whose kids do climb and climb at a good level, not climbing 514 and 515s like your sons, but still doing really well. I think what I hear consistently is exposing them to the outdoors, exposing them to climbing, but not pushing them hard into it, letting them discover the joy of climbing on their own. And I think maybe that's part of what has helped your family, where they were around climbing, they still had their primary sport, and over time they, I guess, it dawned on them that climbing indeed is such a fulfilling way to spend one's time and be outdoors and be athletic. All of that.
Yes, and
Moving
the
on.
one thing I was just going to say, the final comment here is, as part of that, what we did was each summer we would go on kind of an epic road trip for our family. My wife and I and our two boys would pack up the Jeep with the roof rack, and we'd have all of our camping gear, and we would drive west, and we would spend a month camping in Ten Sleep Canyon or at Wild Iris or Maple Canyon or whatnot. And so it was more than just clipping bolts or clipping anchors or whatnot. We were cooking and living around a campfire and camping in a tent and doing that every summer with our kids. So it was a grand experience that was far beyond just climbing. And again, I think my sons have really fallen in love with the whole experience, being outdoors. So many people discover climbing in the gym, and that's great. Gyms bring climbing to the cities to people who might never discover climbing otherwise. But to me, to be just a gym climber, you're really missing out on the beauty and the majesty of that outdoor climbing experience. You can't compare that to being in Yosemite with these giant walls, sticking up, and that is for me. Those settings are almost take things to a spiritual level, and again, I don't think you can find that in a climbing gym.
That's well said. The beauty and the majesty of the outdoors, indeed. I credit the formative trips I had with my parents. I grew up in India, and we would do these little backpacking trips to the Himalayas growing up. And while I, at times, would have preferred to be with my friends doing something else, but those trips to the mountains left a lasting impression. And here I am, obsessed with the outdoors.
Good for you. Yeah. That's one of the things on my bucket list. I don't think I'll ever climb Everest, but I wouldn't mind doing one of those treks to base camp. So that's kind of a bucket list thing for my wife and I.
Absolutely. Eric, how has your own approach to training changed over the years? Some things that you have found work well, and maybe some things that you were espousing over the last couple of decades may not work as well because information, so much has improved, the guidance has improved, the science has improved,
Mm,
our ability to do, let's say, controlled experiments has improved.
mm,
So what has maybe been two or three key learnings on your side on what works and
right.
what doesn't work and climbers should stop doing? Hello, friends. Just a quick break. This is not an ad. If you have been enjoying these conversations, I would love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. It is where I go deeper, sharing stories, reflections, and behind the scenes insights that don't always make it into the podcast. I write about what I'm learning from elite athletes and how to stay ageless in body and mind. If you have ever wanted a thoughtful, inspiring read that ties it all together: training, aging, mindset, and awe. You will love this. You can find the link in the show notes or just head to agelessathlete.co. Again, www.agelessathlete.co, that is, to sign up. And yeah, just a couple of emails a month, and you can unsubscribe anytime. Absolutely no spam ever. Okay, back to the show.
Yeah, well, and it's a rich topic and a good question to ask. And definitely my mind has changed on a number of topics over the years, so sometimes changed numerous times based on experience and research and other people's findings and discoveries. If you go back 40 years, say to the middle 1980s, when there was just a small cohort of us folks, training for climbing, uh, the formula was pretty simple. It was to climb a lot because, climbing is a skill sport. And so just being out climbing, you develop skill, you develop endurance if you're climbing a lot. And then when we would train, the focus was quite simply on just getting strong. And the things that we did to get strong were just kind of a shotgun approach. It was one part lifting weights, one part because we saw John Gill using gymnastics exercises like the rings. We would do ring exercises like front levers and iron crosses. We saw people like Backer, doing weighted pull-ups. We saw Wolfgang Gulick doing one-arm pull-ups in campus training, and so we kind of cobbled together just kind of what seemed to work, kind of what the top climbers were doing. There wasn't so much science to it. It was just kind of what, I don't know if kludge is the right word, but we would just kind of piece together something that kind of made sense. And along with that, probably our diets were quite dreadful as a rule. And I don't want to speak for other people, but back in the 80s, the emphasis was on eating carbs and avoiding fats. And
Mm.
when you avoid fat, sometimes you also are missing out on protein because meat can have fat and protein in it. And so I think while we had enough fuel, let's say on average, because of the carbs that were so common, and the first energy bars like power bars were just basically corn syrup and sugar. Again, just kind of calories. But I think we were deficient in protein, probably in a pretty significant way, speaking for myself, deficient in essential fats, which are important for the brain and the body to function optimally. And so there was a real lack of nuance when it came to diet, and certainly to training, it was kind of just made up on the fly on what made sense. And so all these years later, we now know that we need a lot more protein, especially an aging athlete over age 40. Protein is even more essential because of the way our bodies are changing as we age. But even for younger athletes, if you're protein deficient, you're breaking every time you train hard or climb hard, you're breaking down not just muscle protein, but the force transfer proteins in our connective tissues. And so if you're protein deficient, you're blunting or slowing the ability to rebuild both muscle and connective tissues, which obviously can hurt performance and recovery, but also can lead to injury. And so the climbers who are protein deficient, both in the past and in the present, tend to be quite injury prone. And so paying more attention to getting enough daily protein is a very important thing, and getting the right amount of oils. We now know that things like seed oils can be inflammatory, and if consumed more than small amounts, not very good for a human being or certainly an athlete, but consuming the proper types of oils in our diet. And so, the information is now out there and available if you have the wherewithal or the willpower to apply that information. Uh, but it's tough in 2024. We're surrounded by so many terrible foods, highly enriched foods. You know, I think 40% of the population is now clinically obese. It's incredible. And 50 or 60% of the population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And so now climbers, thankfully, tend to be pretty healthy people in comparison to the averages, the population averages. And we are in a strength to weight ratio sport. So there's some uh, incentive to kind of watch what you put in your mouth, but you still have to make the right choices. More protein, uh, generally more fiber and vegetables, less fast foods and less enriched foods, and perhaps supplementing some things that you're going to be deficient on, because there are very common deficiencies: magnesium, vitamin D, zinc. There's a variety of trace minerals that if you're deficient on them, which some studies show as much as half the population is, can really affect your hormone levels, especially again as you age, where you're trying to optimize yourself and hang on to your youthful energy and physique. It becomes even more critical that you get those things right and avoid the self-inflicted wounds that can come about by way of junk foods. Alcohol is a big one. That's something that every year I'm trying to reduce. Obviously drugs, which I'm not a drug user of any kind, but I am a modest consumer of alcohol. And so, again, trying to remove those kind of self-inflicted wounds from the things that are surrounding us is as important as trying to kind of do the right things in the gym and select the right foods at the grocery store.
Wise words indeed. And I am speaking to athletes of different genres. So when I speak with cyclists and surfers, and of course other climbers, of course, the message around getting whole foods, covering your nutrient base, and getting adequate protein, especially for more seasoned athletes, that message seems very universal. So I think the science has seems to have come around a long ways from some of those fad diets that you alluded to in the 80s and 90s, which followed popular culture.
Yep.
One sad part is when I travel the world, I think a lot of the world, the developing world, which is suddenly coming up, their diets have now started approximating American diets more. So they are eschewing their traditional diets, which were healthier in many cases, and are gravitating more to more processed foods. But again, that's a whole different conversation. Coming back to training,
Yeah.
there's so many things I want to ask you about. We have limited time. Some things with training per se, Eric. When one is selecting a climbing coach these days, a lot of us were self-coach climbers. If you may, we read books, we read your books. But when it comes to selecting a good climbing coach, what are some things one should look for? And also, do you think remote coaching can be effective?
Okay, well, first, the remote coaching, of course, is quite common these days, especially post-COVID. And I do a little bit of that. Because I'm so busy with PhysiVantage Nutrition, my coaching career is taking kind of a back burner. I refer a lot of people to other coaches. I take on just a few clients a month with a very compelling story or something that I really want to be involved with or support. Uh, but so, yeah, I mean, remote coaching can be effective. There's obvious limitations not being there in person to climb with somebody, let's say. Uh, you can view some video of them online, and certainly you can interact and have a very dynamic relationship. And so, certainly, I think there's value there. I think the ultimate is to have an in-person relationship with a coach in a gym. And in terms of selecting that coach, I think, climbing has so many sub disciplines. And so the right coach for, let's say, a 16-year-old competition climber who aspires to maybe go to the Olympics someday, the right coach for that person is going to be different than the 25-year-old who wants to boulder V12 or 14 or 16. And a different coach would be appropriate for someone who wants to be a route climber, climbing 512, 513s, or a different coach for someone who wants to be a accomplished big wall climber or mountaineer.
If you don't mind, maybe we can triangulate a little bit and talk about the typical busy urban climber who is managing multiple fronts, career, family, still has high aspirations for excelling with, let's say, the athletic type of climbing, either bouldering or sport climbing, what have you. For that kind of person, what would be some things to look for in selecting a climbing coach?
Yeah, well, as I was saying, there's so many different sub-disciplines, but with regard to sport climbing and bouldering, which is kind of the most common scenario these days, it was someone that lives in a city and climbs in a gym during the week and maybe ventures outside on the weekends. A coach I mean, first of all, with experience is I uh, am a far better coach now than I was 40 years ago because I've worked with thousands of climbers. And with every new climber I work with, it's a new puzzle to be solved because no two climbers are the same. It's kind of that snowflake principle. Every climber is unique, and so training every climber must be unique as well if you're going to do it effectively and help the person become, realize their potential and hopefully avoid injury, and be able to also excel outside of climbing and have time for the other things in their life and finding that balance. So, someone engaging a coach who's only been at it a year or two, not that that person can't give some quality information, but I would think, finding the coach who's been at it for 8 or 10 years would be the better choice, because they've seen, more, snowflakes. They've worked with more climbers and solved more of those complex puzzles. And again, with every climber a coach works with, you hopefully are learning something in terms of cause and effect, and just how climbing and training integrates into that person's unique lifestyle and time constraints and financial constraints. Some people can only climb outside and travel once every couple of months. Other people are outside every single weekend climbing. That would demand different programs, different training programs in the gym, in those two different scenarios. So I would look for somebody who has experience and has a proven track record. If you can, if they have a website, or if there's a way to kind of know some of their previous clients and talk to them and get some feedback. Whereas, there's so many of these online coaches now that are promoting themselves that, if you're viewing them from afar through your laptop or phone, it's hard to really know what you're getting, and just, because they have a slick advertisement or a catchy sell phrase doesn't mean that they're going to be a good coach for you. And so, I mean, you could try people out, and there's no reason you can't switch coaches every few months. That being said, for a training program to be effective, you have to kind of go in and trust it for more of a longer term, 3 to 6 to 12 months. And so I'm not sure you could assess a training program in just a month or three, but you might, you know, gain some knowledge on the person you're working with. And so, yeah, that's kind of a tough question to answer. And I guess ask around, talk to other climbers at your gym if they have hired coaches who are successful. And, if you're a newbie climber, some of these, kind of cookie cutter programs where you can kind of download a basic program, like here's a program to train to boulder V3, or here's a program to train to climb 510. It's kind of a very generalized program. For a newbie, that cookie cutter program might be okay as a starting point. But ultimately, as you progress in the sport, you're in it a few years, or you improve to kind of that intermediate level, you need something more tailor made. And, again, having a coach that can work with you in person, see you climb, see you boulder, take you through some new exercises, make sure you're doing them properly. That type of in-person instruction would be the gold standard.
I have to agree that the climbing coaching should be tailored to one's goals. There is no substitute for experience. So,
Mhm.
somebody who has worked with usually more climbers for a longer number of years probably has a greater repertoire of information to draw upon. Getting a bit more specific about training, I think the science, or the, let's say, the advice around mobility and stretching seems to have also evolved over the years. And I still think there are maybe a couple of different schools, and some schools call for more on the wall training, and some schools seem to espouse for more stretching and more end range stretching. Where do you lie in the spectrum? Or maybe you have a whole different
Mhm.
approach to adding mobility and stretching into one's training arsenal.
Right. You bet. You bet. Yeah, well, obviously, to move effectively on a climbing wall, you need to have adequate range of motion. You need to be able to contort your body into certain positions. And, females, for example, can excel more easily at doing those big splits, let's say, when you're stemming in a dihedral or needing to really contort your body better than the typical guy can. But even amongst women or within men, genetics is a real factor. The structure of our joints, and so someone like me, the structure of my joints and my connective tissues, despite 40 years of working on flexibility, I've never been able to do a split. It's just not going to happen. It's not in me to be able to do a split. But I still have incredible range of motion when it comes to actual, use on a climbing wall. I can really high step very, very high because I have strength in those end ranges. So while I can't, you know, put my foot up to my shoulder, I can get it up above my hip and actually lift it there. So I have strength throughout my range of motion. So some people develop this incredible, static flexibility, like they can stretch into large positions, but they can't actually move their body there when they're doing a sport. My flexibility, while modest, is very functional. Some people have extreme flexibility, but it's not so functional, or they don't have control of it in the ways they need to for their sport. Getting back to kind of what I think people should do, what I prescribe is during the morning, when you wake up in the morning is when I like to do it, or it might be when you arrive at the gym, uh, doing things that warm you up and kind of in a dynamic way work through your ranges of motions with movements. And getting on a warm up climb, like I'll get on an auto belay at the gym. And even though 5'8" is really easy for me, I'll get on auto belay and climb up and down a couple times on a 5'8" just to kind of work through the range of motion and not even necessarily climbing the route, kind of practicing stepping a little higher with each lap, twisting my body different directions, warming up my core muscles. And so kind of dynamic movement, dynamic stretching at the start of the workout to kind of prepare you for your performance climbing or your training. And then if you are going to do any of that kind of old school static stretching, the appropriate time to do that is at the end of the session when you have a very warm body, muscles, the joints are well lubricated. You could do a little bit of static stretching, or I prefer to do that in the evening. I will do some foam rolling and some stretching in front of my TV set in the evening, like say around 8 or 9 o'clock at night, kind of as part of my end of day wrap up or winding down. The old school 40 years ago, doing all these static stretches at the start of a workout has pretty much been disproven. That's not a smart thing to do. It can potentially even get you tweaked or injured. And it just doesn't help your session at all. Could even take away from the session. So you want to do more of those dynamic, active movements to warm up before the session. And then if you're going to do some static stretching for gains, you would do it at the end of the session or in the evening. And if you do it every day, you can get, climbers, like elite climbers like Alex Megos and Adam Andra. I know that 10, 15 years ago, neither of them could get anywhere near doing a split. And now, 10 or 15 years later, by doing some static stretching, and Alex does a lot of yoga as well. He can do a very impressive. A gymnast would be, an Olympic gymnast would be happy to have Alex's mobility in terms of what he can do. That was something he gained. He wasn't born with it. And so there is a time and a place for some of that static stretching, but it's not at the start of your workout.
That is quite clear. The importance of separating out dynamic stretching and static stretching, and then being able to use those things appropriately and figuring out what one is lacking at that end stage. Because you mentioned high stepping, that is such an important skill for climbers, and all of that resonates. When it comes to climbing injuries, have you seen people rebound from bad injuries, the kind where doctors may have prescribed ending their climbing. I don't know if you have had any bad injuries yourself.
Mm.
Any reflections there?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you climb long enough, if you train long enough, you're going to experience an injury of some kind. I mean, climbing is hard on the body, and we grab these really small holds and sometimes pull a large percentage of our body weight on them. We grab these sometimes if you're into harder climbing or bouldering, you're grabbing holds dynamically lunging to holds at full extension where your shoulders in a risky, quite unstable position. And, torn labrums are an epidemic of sorts among hard training, hard, bouldering climbers. And of course, finger injuries, elbow tendonitis, uh, more recently, knee injuries, ankle injuries relating to both heel hooking and, but also jumping off of boulders or, landing in a bad position. So, yeah, I mean, climbing in some ways could be as dangerous as football. And even though climbing's not a contact sport, there's a lot of walking wounded in our sport. And so to be very mindful of, I think that's part of a coach's job early on. That's something I worked with my kids when they were, learning to train for climbing is, you know, if you're going to use a campus board or use a hangboard, there's a right and a wrong way to use it. And you can get injured very quickly using it the wrong way. And I probably can't go down that rabbit hole right now, right here, but you need to know how to use those tools. And same thing when it comes to lunging and doing very hard movements, odd body positions. There's a time and a place to do them, and there's also situations where you need to be disciplined and say, not today. I'm too tired to do that move again or to try that move again. A lot of injuries happen in a fatigue state where you don't have control. Yeah, it's a very important topic, and just having a single injured finger or achy elbow or a shoulder injury, while the rest of your body's fine and your mind is motivated, that one body part can take you out of the game. And of course, if you're one of those climbers who says, "I'm going to forge ahead despite the injury," sometimes you get away with it, but quite often you don't. The climbing through the injury thing just doesn't work very often. If you're a quarterback playing in the Super Bowl, yes, you're going to play through the injury because that's the last game of the season, and you're trying to win it all. But if you're a climber who has the rest of the season ahead of you or the rest of the life ahead of you, is pushing through that injury today or this week or this month a smart thing to do? In many cases, it's not. It's better to try to nip it in the bud, take some countermeasures to correct the problem, see a doctor to find out what the problem is, because not every finger pain is a pulley injury. There's a number of other things that can be going on. You might think you have a pulley injury, but it could be something completely different. Same thing with your shoulder. There's a dozen different things that could be causing pain in your shoulder. Though a torn labrum is quite common, there could be a variety of other things. And so being quick to back off what is hurting you, being quick to seek medical advice. I think those are things that a smart climber does. Ignoring the pains and forging ahead, taking high doses of ibuprofen just to cover up the pain so you can keep climbing. Those are things that many climbers do, but it's not a smart choice, and it may come back, likely will come back to bite you at some point. And you asked about my injury history, and I've kind of had a sampling of everything over the years. Back in the 90s, I had a meniscus tear in my knee. I'm not sure if it was from climbing or from running, but I had it scoped and cleaned up. I'm fine. My hips are totally fine, though I know some climbers my age who have hip issues. A couple of them have had hip replacements. I've had a couple instances of mild elbow tendinosis over the years, but I've been able to always correct it with a little bit of rehab and adjusting my training. Pulley tears, I don't know, over 47 or 48 years of climbing, probably had a half a dozen different pulley tears, none of them complete pulley tears, all of them kind of partial tears that, again, kind of I heeded the warning signals and backed off, climbing for a bit, for a few weeks, stopped crimping for a month, did things to rehab the injury. Today, we know you can get these pulley splints to put on, just kind of serve as a bit of a cast to support the pulley so it heals in a less lax way than it would if you didn't use a pulley split. So there's some new technology, a lot more knowledge coming up, and if a climber experiences a significant injury like a double pulley tear or a torn labrum, there are some good surgeons out there who can fix you up and get you back in the game. A climbing buddy of mine actually had a shoulder replacement, which I think most every doctor would say that's the end of your climbing in terms of getting like not just a little shoulder repair, but a full-on replacement. And and this gentleman, 2 years later, after the shoulder replacement, I think he just sent 513C or something like that. So that's incredible. Again, it takes a good surgeon and a really good patient who can follow instructions and rehab, I guess, and a little bit of luck probably to get that outcome. If climbers are smart and self-aware, react to developing pains prudently, you can overcome most of these things quickly and get back to the business of training and climbing. And hopefully, like myself, be in the game at age 60. I've done two of my hardest climbs in the last couple of years. So I'm still able to climb at a pretty high level. And hopefully I can keep that going a bit longer.
You have been inspiring us, Eric, not just with your education and information that you provide, but also with your own climbing accomplishments. Congratulations on your hard ascents. On the topic of injuries, I think yes, if one is a little bit negligent or maybe even somewhat casual with things, all the abuse our body suffers with climbing and sports catches up, and some of it is inevitable indeed. I actually have bad shoulders myself, and I'm taking a break from climbing, but hopefully I can get back in the game. A couple of quick questions. I know we're running out of time. I feel if I could engage you for a long time, and I hope we have a chance to come back and meet again. If you could just have one training board, Eric, I know that you mentioned you had or you have a tread wall, but then I recently noticed that you have also been pushing yourself on the kilter board. If one could only have one board, which is your favorite? It could be a moon
Yeah.
board or something else as well.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not an expert on this board training stuff. That's kind of new school. Have had a home Woody at my house for 20 years, and a tread wall, and I have about 15 different hang boards, for finger training. Uh, so kind of exploring the whole system wall thing this past winter was new to me, and I think they all have value. They're all quite different. The moon board is more technical. The holds are just generally harder to grab. It involves a lot of squeezing. I think, and I don't want anybody to take this as a negative, but I kind of had the feeling that like the moon board holds could be injurious to me if I trained on it a lot, just because it's a little more gnarly and grip intensive. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, the kilter board, the holds, if you're training at 40 degrees, many of the holds are slightly in cut, tend to be, more user friendly, more like first pad holds. The foot holds are smaller, but the hand grips, most of them are much larger and better. And so it felt a little less tweaky to me, let's say, and perhaps just I guess for me a little more fun because I could just climb and feel more competent on the kilter board in terms of doing problems. And because the grips are a little better, I felt like I got a better workout through my core and through my larger muscles in terms of doing powerful movements, which is one of the things I wanted to improve this winter. Is you get older, you tend to lose power. I have really, really good endurance, but the other end of the spectrum, the power end of the spectrum, is waning. And so I felt the kilter board gave me a little something there this past winter season. That being said, after doing 2 kilter board sessions a week for 4 weeks, during the month of January, I did end up developing a little bit of pain in my index finger, something I've never had before in that finger. And it's not a pulley tear. I think it's more like a synovitis, which is a little bit of an inflammation of the flexor tendon sheath. Don't think it's a big deal, but I kind of, after those 8 sessions, which I had a blast doing, and I felt I got some gains from, I've had to remove the kilter board from my workout the last month or two and go back to more just endurance climbing, which is my forte as an older climber. Hopefully I can revisit the kilter board here later this year without any pain in my fingers. But whenever you do, regardless of your age, whenever you introduce a new training
Mm,
modality, a new exercise, a new protocol, a new tool, there's the potential for it to, kind of, I mean, the novelty is a good thing because you're challenging your body with something it's not done before, but the novelty can also be something that provokes the body and
mm,
leads to injury. And so, whenever you introduce new things, you want to kind of do it in smaller doses. And maybe that's the one mistake I made. Maybe instead of introducing the kilter boarding twice a week, I should have done it once a week for the first month, and then
mm.
maybe ramped it up to twice a week in the second month. And maybe I wouldn't have developed this little bit of tenderness in my finger. So even the old coach can make mistakes. Perfection is not attainable when it comes to performance or training. And so again, I'm still kind of learning some things. Even after all these years.
I love the kilter board. We have access to large gyms here in San Francisco, but I'm often hiding at my local gym here with, with the kilter board. So all of those things make sense. And back in the day, a lot of people would talk about the tread wall, but maybe tread walls are not as popular anymore, though I can absolutely see the relevance of having a tread wall for being able to work on long, continuous climbing techniques. A couple of things that I find when I talk to athletes of other sports, sometimes climbing seems to lag behind a little bit. I think it's catching on. Where do you think is the role of these new modalities such as cryotherapy? So I was talking to Hans recently, and Hans was talking about contrast baths. And these days, surfers, for example, have caught on to ice baths. So where do you think cryotherapy has benefits? Another question here is intermittent fasting when it comes to dieting. Again, other sports seem to be embracing that. Do you think so? I just keep it to these two things: cryotherapy, intermittent fasting, and if there's maybe one other thing you want to throw in there on
Yeah, yeah.
new modalities.
Yeah, so those things both kind of fall in the category of biohacking, I guess you would say, and there are certainly a myriad of other things that would fit into that category as well that athletes consider, or even people interested in longevity are interested in, and definitely. My ears are wide open to all of that stuff, and I've explored a lot of that research. When I turned 50, which is now 10 years ago, but when I turned 50, it was kind of a wake up call for me in terms of it's like, oh my God, my life is now probably more over than it is. There's more of my life behind me now than there is left in front of me. But if I want to try to, stay in the game and have this, have a above average health span and lifespan, I need to really get serious and be more proactive in training smarter and also anti-aging, longevity kind of things. I've explored all of these things. I have out in my garage, I have a sauna that I purchased at about age 50 or 51 because there's a lot of value to regular sauna use in terms of your cardiovascular fitness, heart health, your mitochondria function, and just even as a recovery modality, post workout, sitting in the sauna for 20, 30 minutes, and sweating a little bit of a detox. there's some research that shows it's quite helpful. In terms of the cold, the cryotherapy, there are a number of different uses, and it's hard to give a single answer because the uses, a lot of people don't understand some of the nuance there. But cold is, well, first of all, if you just finished playing a tackle football game, or if you just came off a 1 day ascent of the nose of El Capitan, like Hans Florine does, those things are both brutally grueling on your body in terms of their punishing activities. They're very hard activities. Uh, and there's a strong inflammatory response that you can tamp down if you do a cold bath post game. And that's been a common thing with NFL players for many years. But other activities, if you're riding the Tour de France, you might do some cold baths at the end of the ride every day to kind of control inflammation. But in terms of using it regularly, there's some evidence that, if you tamp down that inflammation chronically on a day-to-day basis over the long term, you actually take away some of your training adaptations. So, in terms of controlling inflammation, it might be useful and helpful after extraordinarily stressful, punishing days. But after run-of-the-mill workouts, it could actually be counterproductive to do an ice bath. There's also these short-term cold plunges where you're just plunging for 90 seconds or 2 minutes, which that's not enough to really affect the inflammatory response, but it is a stimulus for developing these heat shock proteins that are also the sauna can generate as well. That it has benefits in terms of longevity and health and wellness. Aside from, a climber or a football player might take an ice bath and sit in there for 10 or 20 minutes. So that's a completely different protocol than the 90-second plunge that is very common that people do for heat shock protein. And then there's potential benefits if you're someone that needs to create more brown fat, that mitochondria rich fat that generates heat. Uh, you can do some cold bath protocols that help that out. But again, that's a very nuanced use of cold plunges. And so I don't think people should mindlessly cold plunge without knowing what the proper protocol is and what they're hoping to get out of it. The sauna is a little more forgiving. The sauna, it's like you sit in there and you do 20, 30, 40 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week, and there's a myriad of health benefits to using the sauna. I forget, what was the other kind of biohack thing that you had mentioned?
Intermittent fasting.
Oh, intermittent fasting. Yeah, and that's another one. Hey, I'm going to admit that I was all into that maybe 6 or 8 years ago. I got into this habit of waking up in the morning. I would have my coffee, but I would not eat anything until about 1 in the afternoon. And then all my food would be between 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. And so it was the classic kind of 18 uh, 6 protocol, or 16-8 protocol, however you want to slice it and dice it. And while I kind of understood the science behind it, the autophagy benefits, the longevity benefits, I mean, there's a bunch of mouse studies that show that if you underfeed them, they live longer. But those mice aren't trying to train for climbing. They're not trying to train for climbing 513. I am. And what I discovered was
Mm.
by not consuming protein, my first 6 waking hours, it was a terrible decision, especially as a middle-aged climber. But I think for anybody, even my sons who are in their 20s, I would not recommend for them, as hard as they train. They train so hard, many days doing 2 workouts a day, that their body is in a catabolic state much of the day. Yeah, the intermittent fasting, I do not recommend for serious athletes. If you're someone whose ultimate goal is longevity, then you probably want to eat like those mice do. And you can listen, David Sinclair is one of these longevity experts who I've read a lot of his work, and he's very much, he's published a lot of that research and, extending the lifespan of the mice by 30% or whatnot. But for an athlete, I feel strongly now, after trying it myself, that it's the wrong thing for a hard training athlete.
I have certainly read David Sinclair's work, and before we started recording, we talked about Human Movements podcast and Human Movement interviews people like Peter Attia, and I think the new sciences for athletes, it's important to keep eating frequently, and the protein dosages, if not provided, could lead to ketosis and other things. So I think your
You
message
bet,
here is
and also yeah, and
consistent.
also being sure you're getting enough, carbohydrate and fats. I mean, really uh, having that macronutrient balance, trying to get it, you know, pretty close for you. And we're all different in terms of our insulin sensitivity, how our body reacts to different foods for sure. I actually, you can't see it, but right now I have a continuous glucose monitor in my
Mm.
upper arm here
Oh.
underneath, and I'm not diabetic. It's a protocol that it's something I've started to do. I did it for a couple months last fall, and I'm doing it now this spring to track uh, my blood glucose. I have a real time tracking on my phone because the phone talks to the monitor. I can see where I'm at when I wake up in the morning. I can see where I'm at after I have that protein shake. I can see where I'm at after I have a plate of pasta and vegetables for dinner, let's say. And during my workouts, I'm a data junkie. I like data, and to be able to have a more intimate understanding of how my body, specifically blood glucose, responds to different foods and uh, different training regimes. Even like strength and power workouts, your blood glucose is going to react differently than an endurance workout. A day at the crags, how much you should eat and when you should eat at the crag to kind of optimize your blood glucose, because it affects not only your energy levels but also kind of your clarity of mind and your recovery between red point goes and between exercises. Again, for a beginning climber, it's TMI, too much information. But for someone who's been at this game a long time and is seeking to really nuance things, which is what I do as a coach, and it's what I do with myself. And when I work with elite level climbers, we're trying to seek out a higher understanding of the little things that they're doing. Because if you're a 515 climber, uh, gains are hard to get. Getting from
Hmm.
515A to 515B uh, is incredibly hard. It's not like going from 510A to 510B.
Hmm.
And yeah, so to eke out those little gains when you're so far up the skill curve and the strength and power curve, you need to resort to extreme nuance. And so, again, when it comes to coaching, if you're one of those climbers that's very high, you're getting up near the ceiling of kind of what you perceive as a genetic constraint, you need to kind of pull out the stops and seek out another level of nuance, which again, it took me turning age 50 to kind of get it, that I needed
Hmm.
way more nuance and discipline and data and
Hmm.
some new interventions in terms of training and nutrition. And so now I'm at age 60, striving for even more nuance, trying to get things right. And I make some good calls and I make some bad calls. I'm very self-aware of the mistakes I make myself, like my little finger, pain that I developed this winter. And so I'm trying to course correct as quickly as I can and not ignore these things. It's a journey that I very much enjoy. Certainly, I think a whole food diet has to be the foundation of our nutrition. Uh, Even the most well-designed diet could have some deficiencies, whether it's protein or certain micronutrients. Vitamin D is a big one. If you're vegan, B12 is a big one. Zinc, magnesium, some of those minerals, uh, even something quite esoteric like uh, cobalt or
Hmm.
selenium. Are quite important for hormone levels. And for an aging dude, the hormone levels are something you're always trying to kind of slow the degradation of. Try to keep yourself as healthful as you can. And I should add that, I'm a big fan of blood work. I think under 40 athletes should get blood work once a year at minimum to track, a variety of markers, metabolic panel, red blood cell panel, thyroid function, being able to see both your T4 and your T3 levels, obviously testosterone, free testosterone, and all the related factors there. And if you do that every year under the age of 40, you establish kind of a track record for yourself, kind of what is your young man or young woman norm. And then as you begin to age through your 40s, through your 50s, and into your 60s, like me, you then kind of know what your baseline was back in your young person days. And then you can see how things have changed, generally for the worse. But you can also take countermeasures nutritionally, training wise, and perhaps if needed in certain situations, with pharmacological interventions to help, correct some of the more critical parameters to, to help preserve, function physically and mentally and increase longevity, and hopefully your climbing or other sports careers, well into your 70s and 80s, which is my goal.
Many of us outdoor athletes aspire to being able to continue doing these things that we love until those decades. And your point on quantifying what we're doing and trying to fine tune these improvements and learning about ourselves. And it is also inspiring, Eric, that you have spent a lifetime in educating us and influencing us, but you are still a learner. And it's humbling that you're still open to learning about new things and new strategies to help us not just keep improving in the things we love doing, but also as healthy individuals. I think this is advice that all outdoor athletes can take to heart. And finally, your investment in creating a venture, again, in this, I suppose, in some ways, crowded world of sports nutrition,
Oh yeah,
focusing on the adventure athlete and what their nutrient needs are. I think that is certainly something that we can all benefit from.
thank
Any
you.
any parting words of wisdom, Eric? I feel I can pick your brain for the rest of the day, but any things you would like to share before we end this call?
Well, I guess the only thing I would say, as an aging athlete, although I aspire to continue to climb at a high level, I'm still climbing 513 level. No matter what your sport is, I don't think you want to get too focused on these objective measures. As you get older, undoubtedly we're going to slip. And some folks quit the sport at that time, whether it's golf or climbing. They'd rather quit the sport rather than see themselves slowly decline in ability. And I think that's sad because, for me, getting outdoors in nature, whether I'm going out for a hike or a climb, it is when I feel most alive and most connected to the universe and, again, spiritually connected when I'm on the side of a wall somewhere climbing, what makes me feel alive. And that's why I hope to climb even, at my older age. If I need to climb 5'6" or 5'8", so be it. I will be a climber. I'm a climber for life. And I hope whether the viewers are climbers or surfers or skiers or whatnot, I would hope, they take on the same perspective that it's more about the experience, the aliveness that you gain from this experience and not be so enamored to perform your best because you can't hang on to that forever, no matter what sport you're in. Your best days will at some point be behind you. I still have a glimmer of hope. My best days are ahead of me, which powers my efforts in the gym and to be disciplined and make the sacrifices I do to still try to climb hard. But I know the days are numbered, though I'm not going to speculate when I'll retire to being a 5'8" climber. So
Those are, thank you, Eric. Those are profound words to end our conversation today. It is to not ever forget why we started getting into these sports in the first place, which is the joy of being able to
you
move
bet.
and use our bodies in the beautiful playground that Mother Nature provides us. And the grades help as a benchmark, but not getting caught up in grades and being able to live and enjoy those things. And I think one will improve and one will see progress as long as we enjoy those fundamentals. Thank you so much, Eric. And there you have it, folks. A truly remarkable conversation with climbing legend and the father of modern climbing training, Eric Hörst. Eric's unique approach to training and nutrition and how he's navigated aging while still pushing his limits in the sport he loves. I hope you walked away with as much wisdom and inspiration as I did. What really resonated with me were Eric's insights on finding joy behind the grades and prioritizing a love for the process. And who knew that intermittent fasting might not be the best approach for athletes? I am definitely reevaluating my own diet after hearing Eric's insights. Be sure to check out Eric's company, PhysiVantage Nutrition, for some of the more innovative products he developed to help climbers optimize their performance. And absolutely make sure to check out his amazing Training for Climbing podcast. And Eric shares a wealth of climbing and training advice for free. We will put links to all of those in the show notes, so do check those out. If you're looking for even more insights on how to climb better and live better, make sure you subscribe to the Ageless Athlete podcast. We have got so many incredible conversations with athletes, adventurers, experts, ready to share their wisdom and inspire you to embrace the journey of aging. So get outside, explore the outdoors, stay smart, stay stoked, and stay ageless. See you next week.
Friends, this is not an ad. This is just a quick message to those amongst us who are listening to Ageless Athlete podcast for the first time. I would love it if you would hit subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or Stitcher or Overcast or what have you. We bring you stories and routines and other inspiration from elites in the world of the best outdoor sports. In each episode, you will find how these athletes stay connected to the outdoors, maintain peak performance, and continue to thrive as they age. I encourage you to look through prior episodes and listen to a couple and see if they resonate. And then, come back next week. We release an episode each week. And I am really inspired to bring you some of the best stories from the world of the outdoors. Okay, back to the show.